This is the Holy Gospel according to John. Now in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He, being Jesus, was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without the Christ not one thing came into being. What has come into being in him was life. And the light was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. You see, Jesus was in the world, and the world came into being through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to what was his own, and his own people did not often accept him. But to those who did receive the Christ, who believed in his name, he did give them the power to become children of God. People who were born not so much of blood or from the will of the flesh or of the will of man, but rather people who were born of God. And so the Word became flesh and lived among us. And we have seen his glory, the glory as of the Father's only Son, full of grace and full of truth. The gospel of the Lord. Please be seated. The cosmic Christ. If you notice, there are stars on the banners, and over the last 2 weeks or so, we have celebrated the Christmas season, and we've been reflecting on a few different stories about the birth of Christ. We started right before Christmas and Christmas Eve with Luke's story, and we see the intersection of the heavenly beings with people on planet Earth. We see the visitation of the angel to Mary, making clear to her that she will be giving birth to the Messiah. And later we see through Luke, we see the intersection of the celestial beings yet again through Joseph in the form of dreams, helping Joseph get a grip on the fact that, yes, while Mary is pregnant and it ain't by you, you will become the stepfather of the Messiah. And so Joseph listens. And then later Joseph gets additional information from the heavenly bodies, recognizing that at some point they will have to move to Egypt. We see these celestial bodies connecting with shepherds who were a half a mile or so outside of where Jesus was born, with an instruction to go to the Holy Family and to pronounce to the Holy Family exactly what had taken place. And we see within these stories people's willingness, attentiveness, and mindfulness to experience the fullness of creation through time and space. And through this, we experience the birth of Christ. And certainly, many months later, we see magi or magicians from Syria who have been given a message through the star to follow the star all the way to Bethlehem. And they did. And they recognized that before them was the Messiah. And yet, once again, Joseph, through a dream, through an angelic dream, recognizes the danger that the family is under, and they exile to Egypt. Now, all of these stories suggest something of a cosmic nature. To a great extent, though, they connect us more to a boots-on-the-ground relationship and how the birth of Shalom, compassion, mercy, justice, and forgiveness takes place when we become open to the fullness of the universe. But today, this message from John takes it into a whole new direction. It opens up time and space in ways that the other gospel writers do not. And typically we view John as the mystical gospel writer, the person who sees the fullness of God's grace in time and space and beyond, and beyond, and beyond. And John says, from the beginning Christ was. From the beginning. Imagine. 4.5 billion years ago, when the earth comes into being, Christ is there. 4.5 billion years. And over the next several billion years on planet Earth, as the earth takes form and shape, as it goes through all kinds of birth pains, hundreds and thousands and millions of species are given birth. Animals, birds, fish, plants, amoebas, stuff. And all of this stuff is interconnected. All of these creations, all of these species, millions of species, are connected into a living, breathing planet called Earth. And Jesus, the Messiah, the Christ, is in the midst of all of this as well. And then, 90 million years ago, we see the birth of humanity. The birth of humanity. And we begin to imagine humanity's relationship with this creation and the fact that Christ was part of this. We fast forward in time to where we have identified the first town, something that we would recognize a little bit more, a corporate entity of people who lived together 10,000 years ago. The first town on record is Jericho, of all things, right in Palestine. Population 2,500, 10,000 years ago. And throughout this, we see Christ as part of that creative experience. And by the time we get to Jericho 10,000 years ago, planet Earth, created by God, Christ in the midst of it, interconnecting all of this life, we see 10 million different species. 10 million different species, all created by God, intersecting, interweaving, breathing, living, creating this magical planet Earth. And upon further reflection, we understand that as life grows, death comes as well. And every year throughout this creative milieu, we see 1 to 5 species become extinct. A process of natural selection that takes place in the universe. Some species become extinct. On average, 1 to 5 per year for millions of years. The problem we have today, as we reflect on the power of the cosmic Christ and creation, is that now, today, we have broken stride with historical, geological tradition, and today we see at least 1,000 species each year going extinct. And what we recognize that is different now than 1,000 years ago, 500 years ago, 200 years ago, 10,000 years ago, is that humankind intentionally or unintentionally, has disturbed uniquely the balance of things in an effort to control life for the sake of controlling it. Now, the cosmic Christ, who creates this world, has connected, though, with people over time. One of the things that I understand is that native peoples, indigenous peoples, Indians, various tribes, various nations, corporate entities of people that are in connection with nature, you see, before they take a step forward, they consider the consequences of the step 15 generations into the future. Can you imagine? They take the slow, rhythmic road of the cosmic Christ. We don't go that slow anymore. I don't know if we think beyond one generation. There are those who are paid to try to figure this out. But we've gone so fast and redefined our lives in such a way that we have shut out, unintentionally I should suggest, the cosmic Christ. Our relationship with creation. We spend a reasonable amount of time thinking about shalom. How do we treat each other in our interrelationships with each other? But we don't, because of the culture we've all been brought up in, we don't really give much thought to this stuff. And yet, John invites us to imagine in a whole new way, to open our mystical life and our minds up, to free ourselves just a bit from the challenges of the day-to-day, and to imagine that maybe there is a lot more to this than we realize. It's not all up to us. But part of the peace that surpasses all understanding is our willingness to imagine the fullness of God's creation, to recognize that Christ is in everything, to recognize we are all interdependent, and to pay attention to how we live and what we do. And I believe that the fruit of this for us is a certain peace to settle us into a whole new reality, and to recognize that this kingdom that we celebrate, that we are part of, that we have been given, is so much more than we can possibly imagine. And to give thanks for that, for it truly is good. Amen.